as compared to those that actually have a less pendants notice of default or an auction date, the numbers are almost equal. I mean, plus or minus 30 or 40,000, but at that point you're just kind of splitting hairs. But I noticed it on the city level as well as on the national level and even on the state level. Is there any kind of weird kind of sort of nerd economic reason why the number of bank-owned properties seems to be almost the same balance as the number that is in active default?
Uh, yeah, that's I wouldn't call that normal. I think it's kind of
It's a weird fact that I just kept testing out again and
yeah.
again. And so something as small as a city like, say, Covina, California, where there's only 40 people with a sale or a notice of default, or, I think it was 60. By the same token, there's about 50 and change bank-owned properties in the same city. It seems to be, uh, certainly they're not completely equal, but they're in the same area. And I was wondering if there
Right.
was some kind of freakonomic explanation for why that was.
You know, I think it has to do. I picture this as a pig and the python,
Okay.
and the if you looked at this a couple of years ago, you would have seen a lot more in that pre-foreclosure stage than REO stage, and but that pre-foreclosure stage has come down more quickly as properties have been pushed through. Now, the fact that the banks are not selling a lot of the REOs right away is I'm not sure as I can answer that fully, but
No,
when they take these properties back, they just don't. It takes them time to to unload them for a variety of reasons, and maybe intentionally in some cases. But you see those sit in REO for a while before they're actually sold, and so then that kind of builds up that number.
which, with all that information, so the build up is to this little final segment before I let Darren go. He recently did another article. You have been everywhere. You did an article. I don't think you knew what the title was going to be, but when Michelle did the piece for Bloomberg, but the housing market is waving a red flag. And this was the reason I initially made my phone call. I believe I had this discussion with Andrea Riccier, with a couple of journalists on the topic. And I don't know if necessarily what you'd call us in is a bubble. I think what you would call it is a unique period of time in real estate history that resembles closely to a bubble, but it's not quite a bubble because we don't have any of the volatile. I can't see anything volatile. I can't.
Yeah.
I literally, unless the equity firms all woke up and go, we're at the top of the market, and they pull, a Sam and start selling all their properties. What's his name in Chicago? Sam.
Um,
Yeah, him.
Seller?
Yes, he sold all his commercial and all his holdings in Chicago. He goes, I'm high enough. I'm out.
I'm good. Yeah.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm out. So if the equity firms wake up one morning and decide, yeah, we're at the top of the market, we're all selling, and they'll probably all sell about the same time, that's probably what will incite the next drop in value. Will be a flood of properties hitting the market all at once. But beyond that, I can't, like, the builders will never catch up. The demand is so ridiculous. The lending constraints are so tight. They're keeping people that are self-employed out of the market. I mean, it's a very engineered market. It's from a
Yeah.
banking standpoint, I'm very impressed with the market. It seems to be fairly solid, but the point being that it will have an equilibrium. Would you agree with the concept that we will eventually reach a tipping point to all of this?
Yes, yes, I do. I think from my knowledge of the last 10 years in the market and experience that we'll go through another down cycle. But, you know, what we went through 10 years ago
Was
it's
nuts.
not going to be exactly repeated.
Right.
And it was probably more of a once in a generation or once in a 100-year type of an event. And so I do think we see bubbles forming in this market, and there are signs of over speculative behavior, which is what the Bloomberg article really was keen in on is behavior at foreclosure auctions.
Yep.
because there's such strong demand. People are overpaying at foreclosure auctions, and we see a high percentage of homes going to investors at auctions because they're willing to pay a higher price, and the banks are happy to let that happen. But so I do see bubbles forming, but the question
Is it?
is it going to, is there some kind of hidden, sharp object that's floating around the bubble that's going to pop it? And that's what I don't see. And that's, I think, what you're getting at. There's no
Yeah, there's no.
huge
I don't see.
fundamental
I could see
flaw.
him accelerating it more. I can see that. I can
Yeah.
see how to accelerate it more. Certainly, from a banking standpoint, all you have to do. Uh, I there is no doubt in my mind, barring WikiLeaks really having something on Hillary, she's going to probably be elected as president. Her and her husband, their housing plans tend to indicate that everybody should own a house. So I would see them loosening up lending standards or certainly making FHA more available in some wider array. That presidency, I could see certainly finding a way to
Yes.
find more financing. And people really don't send me or Daren emails. This is a historical fact. Go look it up. Okay, just go look it up. It's the same plan that her husband had, and it worked very well. It accelerated the prices exceptionally well, and it created value for people who owned homes. And there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is whatever goes up must inevitably come down. And I think it's always fun when I talk to you, Daren, to hypothesize. I can see going up, but really, what would cause like it
Well,
would.
the weakness, what you mentioned, I think is one threat, is a flood of inventory, and really the main source of that would be some of these big hedge funds that own tens of thousands of homes. I I don't see that as a huge threat because that would
I think the
kind of
market can
shoot them
absorb it now.
in the
I
foot.
do.
And yes, the market could actually fairly easily absorb it. I think the certainly well, I think the other threat and it's not going to affect every market nationwide. It's really only a select number of markets, is the global economy weakening, and that lessening demand on the demand side from these foreign investors who have really propped up some of the coast, especially like coastal markets like San Francisco, where by the way, we this this is underreported as well, but we have seen a decline in San Francisco prices just over the last couple of months,
Wow.
which after about 49 consecutive months of increases. And in general, I was just looking at the high end numbers, the high end side of the market. If you look at sales volume has declined in um, out of the last 7 months, it's declined in 5 of the last 7 months sales volume. So there's some weakness there, kind of on these trophy markets and high end markets because of the global economy weakening. But it's not
It's not a
a,
sharp
a
object.
huge, widespread, sharp object. Yeah, that's going to
Right. It's
just,
just a natural adjustment
yeah,
to the market in the end of summer. And really, at some point, we're going to find out that people just simply can't afford the prices we're getting at because the jobs don't. I mean, it will come down to jobs and
yes,
affordability. And
yeah,
ultimately, if you're the president, the smart play would be to increase minimum wage, which will then bump up the middle. But it's an ongoing game. It's an ongoing circular game. And as long as they do it, there's no reason for anybody who's holding the bigger story that broke thanks to Trump was the fact that we're at our lowest point in homeowner uh,
ownership rates. Yeah,
ownership rate in history. And it's not that dramatic. It's not really that big a deal as compared to, say, the inventory issue that we're having. But from a relative perspective, yeah, I guess if 40% of the market decided to sell all of their properties at once because they wanted top dollar, it might have a dramatic impact. But I don't think, I mean, for a lack of a better word, Wall Street doesn't own 40% of the properties. It's a mix of
yeah.
countries.
It's
It's a
like
mix.
it's if you look at the big hedge funds, the numbers sound big, but they're really only they're if you stretch, they're 5% of the market,
Yeah.
but I would say it's more like 2% for the real big guys. And so it's not a huge threat, but I do think something you said is key, is that because you have this cycle of intervention in the market that really started with the homeownership type society. I think that was Clinton, and then
Yep.
Bush carried that on. That's ownership
Yep.
society.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
That, but that we're continuing to see the cycle of intervention to try to keep the market going. I think that's I you can't I don't know what it is yet, but that cycle is going to lead somewhere to just building a house of cards that's eventually going to fall. But again,
Yes.
I don't want to say that too strongly. There's no immediate threat, but I think that cycle is what will eventually lead to the market falling as we solve one problem by intervening another way, which causes another problem, which solves one problem but causes another problem, and eventually um, the problems you're solving are going to be outweighed by the problems that you're causing by
Right.
intervening.
And that's what I thought would inevitably happen, and I've kind of been worried about. But now that I look at the numbers, it's a remarkable job by the banks and by government all working together. This is when government and banks work together for something good and not, I know everybody complains about what happened in 2006 and 7, and fraud and greed is always going to happen. It's inevitable when you're talking billions and trillions of dollars. People just don't see the difference in skimming off a couple of $1 million at those levels. And sadly, the homeowners always have to pay. But this is from what I can tell of this market, this is a great explanation, and it'll be this way in the history books probably for my grandkids kids to look at and go, this is where the government stepped in and did good. I mean, it could have been much worse. It could have been Great Depression bad, because you're talking about the most tangible asset anybody will actually own,
Hmm.
for a lot of people in the United States, where we do have such a diversity in the wealth of this country. The home seems to be the one thing that people seem to have, an home or their land, and that was taken away for a short period of time and might not have come back. Uh,
Yeah, and I think you glossed over the homeownership rate a little bit. I would say that is a fundamental shift, that low homeownership rate in the way that people view homeownership, or it's a reflection of the way people
yeah.
view homeownership. And so for realtors and real estate agents out there, the to me one of there's probably many takeaways from that, but one takeaway is the real estate investor market is a much bigger share of the market now, and so
Yeah.
finding ways to find those real estate investors and have those as clients. Um, those are the people who are doing a lot more buying and selling now than they were 10 years ago, where it was more of your first time home buyer.
So I'm going to close off on this topic because as I was talking to you, I don't know what headline would catch a realtor or an investor's eye with this particular episode, but I thought if I gave you this topic and see where it went, which is there's still 400,000 properties out there that are at least 6 months delinquent and on some kind of foreclosure track. That seems to be a lot of properties. And for those of you listening, there are 400,000 that were actually foreclosed upon, which are listings and or deals as you as an investor or a realtor missed out on. Um, I I just don't understand why this market isn't tapped as much as it is. I mean, you've had time in it now over the last 10 years looking at it. Do realtors and investors just really hate what guys like me at the bank did during the short sale period? Did we just make it so ugly that that everybody's kind of gun shy to deal with defaulted properties?
Yes, I think probably it's all your fault, Lee.
It's
Yeah,
IndyMac
no,
and Countrywide and Wells
no,
and
I think
and
no, I think that the the pendulum is shifting. Certainly, short sales got a terrible name, and defaulted properties got a bad name because they became just you know time sucks and rat's nests to deal with. But because getting back to the original topic, or one of the original topics we talked about, home equity, because you have that home equity element that's much different than it was 5 years ago, that solves a lot of the problems that people may have had with defaulted properties in the past. And so I do think the attitudes are shifting, I mean, you were talking about this early on. It's a hot topic is these pre-foreclosures. People realize that defaults are